Senator Roberts.
Madam Acting Deputy President, as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I remind people of what Thomas Jefferson said. We can have farming without cities, yet cannot have cities without farming. No farmers, no Australia. No food. Why does this Labor government that uses the states to steal property from hard-working landowners and rips off farmers left, right and centre? Why? Because it can, and it builds on actions of past Liberal national governments. Before explaining that, I have a list of 8 keys to ongoing, sustained human progress, just ones that I've developed over the years. The first is freedom. Second is rule of law. Third is constitutional continuance and competitive federalism. The fourth is secure private property rights. Fundamental. It enables freedom. The fifth is strong families. Sixth, affordable, reliable energy. Then fair and honest taxation, and then honest money. Secure property rights in my list is fourth. Why? Because secure property rights are fundamental to reward for genuine effort and creativity and for investing and taking risk. People won't do that if they can't keep what they secure, what they earn. Secondly, secure property rights are necessary for people to exercise initiative. Thirdly, secure property rights are necessary for people to exercise responsibility and accountability. Because if you can just steal it, why would you have any accountability? And the fourth fundamental about secure property rights is freedom. It enables freedom. These have been well known for centuries. It's one of the reasons communism and socialism always fail, because they steal property rights. And it's the reason why personal free enterprise succeeds until the government, and this has happened repeatedly throughout history, gets too big and infringes on civil liberties, destroys property rights and infringes on civil liberties. So it's very important, and our founding fathers agreed, because our Commonwealth Constitution recognises and enshrines the importance of secure property rights. Under Section 51, Clause 31 of the Commonwealth Constitution, our Constitution, the Commonwealth may acquire property from a state or person providing it is on just terms. So reading that in context, from the Constitution, Section 51, the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws for the peace, order and good government of the Commonwealth with respect to, and then one of them is listed, one of the many listed is the acquisition of property on just terms from any state or person for any purpose in respect of which the Parliament has power to make laws. That is clear. Just terms. This means that the Commonwealth, the federal government, must pay the person being dispossessed of rights to use their land reasonable and just compensation for the property the Commonwealth acquires. So if the Commonwealth interferes with rights to use land, it must pay just terms compensation. Generally, states lack such property protections. Should a state acquire, or even steal, as has happened, land for a state, it does not need to provide compensation. Under the state constitutions, no compensation is required. Even if a state acquires land for a Commonwealth purpose, the state is not bound under the Commonwealth Constitution to acquire it under just terms. This would then enable the working around the constitutional protections for landowners, as I'm going to tell you with a story that is actually factual. This is a story about the worst theft of property rights in our country's history. It happened during everyone in this chamber's lifetime. In 2007, after John Howard was booted from office, I wrote a personal letter of thanks to him. I thought highly of John Howard. Thanked him and acknowledged him for his 30 years of work and being at the forefront of the governance and policies introduced by the Keating and Hawke governments, as well as his own later government afterwards. Yet, I didn't know at the time something that I'm going to share with you. It was the former Liberal National Coalition government under Prime Minister John Howard who came up with the disgraceful mechanism of using the states to do the federal government's dirty work for it. This is not new. This goes back to 1996-97. The story continues. It starts with the United Nations Kyoto Protocol on climate variation and John Howard's admitted desire to comply with it. He said he won't sign the Kyoto Protocol, but we will comply with it as a country, the 1997 UN Kyoto Protocol. And he realised, or his government realised, that people were not ready at that time to shut down industry, power stations, agriculture, travel, transport that produce carbon dioxide. So they came up with a different idea, a worse idea. Stop the farmers clearing their land. Stop the farmers using their land as they were free to do so. The Constitution, though, requires compensation, and that would have been worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The federal government could not afford that. So what the Howard government did is it went around the Constitution using the states to do the federal government's dirty work of stealing farmers' land to comply with the UN Kyoto Protocol. Because John Howard's government realised that if they could cut the production of carbon dioxide, or they could stop the clearing of land, which would be getting credit for giving more absorption to carbon dioxide, so same net effect. And he did it without any scientific basis, as I'll explain in a minute. So the Howard government's first response, one of the early responses, was to do a deal with Rob Borbidge's National Party government in Queensland. So we had a National Party government in Queensland, 3 signatures from the senior National Party people, doing a deal with the Liberal National government in federal government. They did a similar deal with Bob Carr in New South Wales, the Labor Party, and then entrenched the deal with Peter Beattie in Queensland. And despite the denials under the Morrison government, this is still something the federal government relies upon for climate compliance. The irony is that John Howard portrayed himself as a champion of the Constitution and a champion of property rights that are fundamental to free enterprise societies. So I ask you, if you don't believe me on this story, ask Peter Spencer, who nearly died protesting. Ask Dan McDonald and ask many farmers who are awake to this in Queensland and New South Wales. In 2013, 6 years after being booted from office, John Howard said, as the annual lecturer on climate at the Global Warming Policy Foundation in London, which is a sceptic think tank opposed to the impacts of climate policy economically, at that speech in London, John Howard said that after doing what he did to destroy our electricity sector and steal farmers' property rights, that on the topic of climate science he was agnostic. None of it was driven by climate science. Yet he led a government that stole farmers' property rights, introduced a renewable energy target that is now gutting our electricity sector, shipping manufacturing overseas because of high electricity prices, driving families broke and causing inflation. His government concocted the national electricity market, which is really a racket. It's not a market, it's a bureaucracy that controls prices. And his government, contrary to what people have been saying about Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, his government, his party, he was the first major leader of a major party to put in place an emissions trading scheme as policy. Now this set a pattern for Labor, because Labor, if you look at the history of climate responses in climate policy and energy policy, Labor Party, the Liberal National Party, introduces climate and energy initiatives, and the Labor Party, when it comes in, then ramps them up. Have a look. Have a look at the safeguard mechanism as a foundation for a global carbon dioxide tax. That was admitted when Greg Hunt, under Malcolm Turnbull's prime ministership, introduced the safeguard mechanism in 2015. It wasn't Chris Bowen, he just ramped it up. UN Net Zero, first introduced by Scott Morrison, ramped up by the Greens and the Labor Party. Carbon farming, or money farming, sterilising and stealing the land, locking it up, increasing costs of feral animal management and noxious weed management for all the farmers in the area, locking up land so that it becomes just full of weeds. UN biodiversity policies, look at the Howard government again. Back to the Howard government, 2007 Water Act, Murray-Darling Basin Authority, separated water access and water entitlements from the land. And now we see in the Murray-Darling Basin, with the loss of property rights and water entitlements, the land is now married back up with water in the hands of corporate farmers, corporate farms. And as part of the Water Act, one of the aims, repeatedly stated throughout the Water Act, is that the aims of the Water Act include compliance with international agreements. What the hell is that doing in our legislation? So let's have a look at the Labor state and federal governments. The BD government, Labor government in Queensland, ramped up the stealing of farmers' property rights to impose more restrictions on farmers' use of land. So did Anna Blight's government. Campbell Newman's government failed to restore property rights. Just looked the other way. And then Anastasia Palaszczuk has extended the stealing of property rights and entrenched it. The states have become adept at this method of stealing land from landowners, mostly as an attack on farmers and not paying just terms compensation. Another way the states, Queensland in particular, do this is by using environmental reasons to justify placing restrictions on farmers' use of land, reducing the worth of land, preventing it from alternative productive use and preventing development of the land for agricultural or grazing purposes. For example, the Barrier Reef protection legislation, contrary to the evidence and of no impact of farming on the Barrier Reef, and having a devastating impact on communities due to the unfounded and unscientific restrictions that the Labor government has placed on farming communities up and down the east coast of Queensland. Destroying productive land with woody weeds under native vegetation protection legislation, turning productive land with a bright future into just a monoculture of woody weeds with no grass, and that increases erosion. This Labor government in the federal parliament has declared war on farmers and primary producers. It's hijacking prime agricultural land to install banks of ugly wind turbines and poisonous and dangerous solar panels, vandalising literally acres of otherwise productive food-producing land. Any person should be able to see the stupidity and hypocrisy and the economic devastation of such actions. In its desperate attempts to virtue signal to the world that it is a conservation climate-saving giant, the Labor government is hell-bent on recovering the landscape with expensive and inefficient wind turbines, ugly banks of solar panels, and damn the consequences. We see huge complexes of solar and wind turbines built with no connection to the grid. In Victoria we see it, in Queensland we see it. Now they think we better build transmission lines. So transmission lines are going to chew up prime environmental habitat and farming. There is now more than 100 square kilometres of koala habitat in Queensland under threat to developers of these destructive wind turbine projects, all in the name of so-called renewable energy at the cost of the environment and extinction of rare wildlife. Another aspect of the killing the environment to save it. Other damage to farming from the Labor government includes stopping regional infrastructure spending to improve the productivity of their regions, stopping live cattle and live sheep exports. Farmers are hard-pressed to stop the states acting for the Commonwealth from stealing land and from attacking the property rights of farmers. The Labor government, in bed with the Greens and the Teals, is pushing inhuman and anti-human policies, anti-environment policies, anti-Australian policies. Labor, Greens and the LNP, the Liberal Nationals, are hell-bent on promoting projects that are destroying the land, destroying the environment, increasing unemployment, destroying the economy and pushing up the cost of living in Australia, and reducing our security by exporting our major manufacturing. When it becomes too expensive to sip a latte in the city, even the Teals might wake up to the fact that their lefty policies are making it too hard to continue living in what was the lucky country. If our farmers chuck it all in, this country is lost, and the Chinese can simply walk in and create a food bowl to feed Asia. I remind you, Thomas Jefferson said, you can have farming without cities, yet you cannot have cities without farming. No farmers, no Australia. I haven't got time at the moment, but this is not restricted. The stealing of property rights is not restricted to farmers. It's happening in urban environments, including Caboolture near Brisbane. It's happening in Mossman, in the City Council of Mossman in Sydney. So I fully support this motion. I support the motion from Senators Colbeck and Cadell. It needs to go much further to encompass past theft of property and federal-state collusion, enabling uncompensated theft of property rights with no just terms compensation. Thank you.